All right, today we're in the book of Proverbs in chapter 19. Now, we've repeated over and over and over again, the purpose of the book of Proverbs is to give us those little tidbits of information so that if we will take heed to it, we can live a happy life. Now, the wonderful thing about each one of these little small tidbits is that every one of them is such a big thing. You can take each one of these thoughts and sit down and start thinking about it and start expanding it out, and it just becomes a great big subject. We could take the concordance and go through on each subject that is brought up and see how many other times it is mentioned in the Bible, and we would all of a sudden be impressed. Wow, this subject is mentioned over and over and over and over again in the Bible. But in our study of the book of Proverbs, we're not going to do this because we would become totally lost. We would be dealing with hundreds upon hundreds of scriptures because you would find them scattered all the way through the Bible warning us of these things. So as we start today, let us just remember, keep in mind that a proverb, we have said, is a long life in a short sentence. In other words, we take somebody who has lived a long life. They have been able to glean wisdom during this life. They have tried this, they've tried that. They've failed and they've succeeded. And then they were able to say, all right, here is the important thing. That if I will do this one thing, it's important, it will save me a lot of trouble. And then they are shrewd enough or inspired enough, maybe we should say in the book of Proverbs, to be able to put it into a short, pithy statement. Now, the purpose of a short, pithy statement is it causes us to remember. When you take a subject and you talk about it for 10 minutes, you might not remember what the speaker said. But if you take a really important subject, really important subject, and he speaks for 18 seconds, let's say, you remember, you say, wow, oh, okay. And so it'll make an imprint upon your mind. That's what the book of Proverbs does. It's these short statements. Now, today in chapter 19, we're going to go down through pretty much verse by verse, and obviously we're going to have to skip some of the verses in here. But we're going to go down, and we'll do it a little bit differently than we've done in other chapters, where we have picked out this verse and this verse and this verse, and we'll just kind of go down through. Now, I want you to notice, as we're going down through these things, how many of them overlap. And this is an interesting thing in the book of Proverbs to study. How many of them overlap? How many of them are about the same subject? In other words, you could say, I could take verse 4 and verse 15 and verse 21 and here, and I could put them together because they're all talking about the same thing. For instance, they might be talking about a sluggard. Today we'll see a couple passages that talks about a sluggard, a lazy individual. But the Proverbs are separated. One verse here, one verse on over here. And so notice how many of these overlap. Now the reason for that is that the Holy Spirit has caused these Proverbs to be put in here. And obviously, the more He warns us about something means that He understands this is a great danger. He's not going to warn us about something that is not a great danger there. If a young person is getting ready to take a hike through the Sandy Mountains over in eastern Washington, and let's suppose it's two teenagers, well, you might warn them about snakes. And you'd say, now be careful about snakes. Now, as you're walking along, keep your eyes peeled on for some snakes. When you come to a rocky cliff, just make sure that you look for snakes. Don't reach down under a rock, see, because you might find a snake. And just make sure that and so you go ahead and you warn them. But how many warnings would you give about be careful of a rhinoceros? Now make sure that you don't run into any rhinoceroses. And if you do, then you've got to really be careful because they're very dangerous. And you would say, you're not even going to mention it. And obviously that is true. So that's what I'm saying. The Holy Spirit warns us about these things over and over and over again. Now, I've pointed out, I don't know how many in the whole book that you would find like this. I've never counted them out. Other people have tried, and they all come up with different answers. They'll all come up with different answers. Some of them will come up with 35, and some of them will come up with 50, and there would be, I don't know how many. It just kind of depends on how you want to measure it out. So keep in mind and say, I've heard that before. So we're going to be hitting a lot of Proverbs here that we've heard before. All right, chapter 1, verse 1. Better is the poor that walketh in his integrity than he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. Now, here's a guy that's perverse in his lips, and of course, what he's talking about, he's contrasting it with the poor. Better is the poor that walketh uprightly. A poor man that walks in an honest way is better than an individual who is perverse in his lips and he's a fool. The obvious point is that he's rich. He's got a lot of money. Now, it would be better to be poor and be a righteous person than it would to be a wealthy individual and to be a person perverse in your lips. So now, if you would say, how many times has he warned us about our lips? How many times has he warned us about our speech? So we might put it down, speech or the tongue. And how many warnings do we have? And we've already had, I don't know how many. I don't know how many more is going to come. But it's over and over and over again. We have these warnings. And how many times have we been warned now about the difference between a rich man and a poor man? That he's looked at it in this way and trying to teach us this lesson. Now there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is every one of us has always dreamed of what it would be like to have wealth. Wouldn't it be something if you could just all of a sudden become a wealthy individual and be able to go do whatever you wanted to do? And you think, boy, that would really be great. And so being rich is one of the weaknesses of man. Now, it really is one of the strengths of man, too. Because if we didn't have this desire to better ourselves in this way, we wouldn't have the integrity that it takes to get up and go to work and really try to accumulate some wealth. Now, on the other hand, what does the Proverbs say about a man that doesn't care whether he has anything or not? He's a sluggard. He's lazy. He doesn't go to work. We've already talked about that guy. And it condemns that individual. So we can put these things and kind of come out with a balance. Yes, I need to have that desire to better myself in this life, but I need to learn how to balance riches and poverty, because there's a lot of things, lot more important things than riches. What's the one thing that he has over and over told us so far that is more important than riches? That much more important than silver, gold, gems, much more important than riches. What is it? Okay, knowledge of the Lord or wisdom. Get knowledge, get wisdom. If you got a choice to become the richest person in the world or to glean wisdom, take wisdom, because wisdom will bring you happiness. Riches will not bring you happiness. It's how you're able to deal with riches that would bring you happiness. And so, as you can see here, We could just talk and talk and talk about these things as you go along, but we're not going to be doing that. 2, also that the soul be without knowledge is not good, and he that hasteth with his feet sinneth. Now, if you're without knowledge, you don't accumulate knowledge, that's not good. You're in trouble. And if you hasten with your feet, now that means that if you run off without thinking, if you jump into things without knowledge, without accumulating knowledge, you're going to end up sinning. So don't act too quickly without thinking it through. 3, the foolishness of man subverteth his way, and his heart fretteth against Jehovah. Well, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. We could see that, a foolish person, he does subvert his way. He's always getting in trouble. He's doing things that he think will make him happy, and then they make him sad, and so forth. 4, notice how many times this is mentioned now in our class here today, and we can see why. And say, okay, why does he talk about this? Wealth addeth many friends, but the poor is separated from his friends. Now, the quickest way of me getting friends is to become wealthy. Now, we see this all the time. When people win the lottery, and so they win $47 million, what happens all of a sudden to all of their family, their long-lost cousins, everybody that's out here, what happens? All of a sudden they show up, don't they? And they show up and, boy, I've been missing you, and I love you. And they show up in this way. Wealth maketh many friends. In fact, I've heard interviews of people that won the lottery, and they've talked about what the problems are. And people say, well, what was your biggest problem? And then I've heard people interviewed that are just wealthy. They didn't win a lottery. They didn't become wealthy overnight. A wealthy person like Bill Gates. And what is one of the most irritating problems that you have? And they will tell you it's having people wanting us to give them money. That's it. People wanting us to give them money. If they can be our friends or our family, they try to put a guilt on us. Well, now all of a sudden you won all of this, and you need to share it with your family. You don't need all of this, and so you need to share it with your family. Now think what that's like to have 32 lost cousins out there, and they're all coming in wanting you to share your wealth. And then guys like Bill Gates, excuse me, other wealthy people, constantly, every day, their mailbox is filled full of letters from somebody that is writing in and saying, I am poor, and I've this, and I've this, and I know that you're wealthy, and would you please give me some money? And so they're asking for a gift. And so that's one of the problems that I have heard wealthy people talk about in their life. But we can see, this is true. It's in here. Now notice if you see it again. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that uttereth lies shall not escape. So if you're not honest, you're going to get in trouble. He that uttereth lies shall not, 6. Many will be earnest in the favor of the liberal man, and every one is a friend of him that giveth gifts. See, there's another one, same thing. The liberal guy is the guy that is liberal with his money. So anybody that's liberal with his money, then you're going to have, well, how many friends will you have? Every man. See, it's what it's going to be. Every man is a friend of him. So everybody will like you if you're going to give them gifts. 7. All the brethren of the poor do hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? What happens when all of a sudden you lose your wealth and you don't have any money, and all of a sudden you need to be the recipient? You need to borrow some money or have somebody to give you some money. Now what happens? So here it is. You take a guy like me today, very wealthy man. So now then I have all of you out there friends. what happens when tomorrow I lose all of my great wealth, and now then I need money? I've got to come to you and I've got to talk to you and ask you to give me money. What happens to our friendship? See, that's what this is talking about in here. This is just practical, everyday advice is all he's getting at. And so he's telling us what to expect when you have wealth, or when wealth comes, or when poverty comes. All of these things bring problems here in life. Now then, we get down to verse 8. He that getteth wisdom loveth his own soul. He that keepeth understanding shall find good. We've seen this 100 times. That it's good for you if you want to be happy. You get wisdom, you get understanding. 9, a false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that uttereth lies shall perish. So if you turn out to be a liar, you will get caught. You will pay for it. Just like if you're a thief. If you're a thief, you might go to Nordstrom's and steal something today and somewhere else and steal something tomorrow. Somewhere along the line, you're going to get caught, and you're going to pay for it. The same thing is if you're not truthful, that's what's going to happen. Verse 10 is interesting. Delicate living is not seemly for a fool, much less for a servant to have rule over princes. Now, there are going to be 2 passages that deal with this over in chapter 30. We'll come across it again. But here it is. It's kind of interesting. And what it tells us here, delicate living, living like the rich, is not seemly or appropriate for a fool. Now, when all of a sudden a fool comes in and given this delicate living, he doesn't know how to handle it. And he's just going to try to absorb it all in one day, much less for a servant to have rule over princes. So what he's talking about is all of a sudden, here, excuse me, again, you take a guy like me, just lives eating cornbread and milk almost every night in my red chair, so I'm sitting there watching the news. And all of a sudden, you exalt me to the White House dinners, and I go there. How will I fit in? See, how do you think I will fit in? I just make a fool of myself there. That's what this is saying that is in here. And then he says, much less a servant who is elevated over a prince or a king. What happens if one of the king's servants becomes a king? Now, go back to your Old Testament and you can read about this, where some of the servants went in and they killed their king, and they became a king. And look at what kind of a king they were. So now what happens if all of a sudden a person that doesn't understand how to rule is elevated as a king? Now this again is kind of like wealth. How many of us have thought, boy, if I were president of the United States, here's what I would do? And how many of us can give advice on what we need to do about the world problems? See? And we have all of this. Now, what would happen if all of a sudden we were elevated into that position? And we're not schooled for it. We're not prepared for it. We've all seen this happen in leadership. I remember back in Jimmy Carter day, the peanut farmer. So here it is, Carter, a peanut farmer, just an old country boy, and he's going to rule like an old country boy, and so he won the election. And instead of riding down in the parade, and he carried his own coat and his suitcase. I think they finally came and got his and Rosalind's suitcase, but they're common people. We're going to walk with the common people, so you couldn't tell the difference between Carter and anybody else. We're going to be common. Now that's really great. But what happened? Well, the peanut farmer didn't understand how to rule. He hadn't been schooled in that. And so now then, history is not going to be kind to him. And yet, was this kind of an individual. Now, the interesting thing is, we all like to think we would like to elect some poor old farmer over in eastern Washington and put him in the presidency, and he could straighten things up. But the fact is, he would make a mess of it. And anybody who has not had the experiences of life to where they can understand all of the way the government works, all of the pitfalls that there are, what you have to watch in your words and all of this, you're going to get in trouble. And that's all that this is saying, that is here. Okay, now you might think really about Lincoln. You say, what about Abraham Lincoln? Here's an old boy that was just, out splitting logs, and all of a sudden they sent him to the White House. But if you study Lincoln, you'll find that's not true. That really is not true. Yeah, he split some logs, but he split maybe 2 in his whole life. The fact about Abraham Lincoln is he's one of the greatest presidents that ever lived. He's one of my choice. Maybe I'd say George Washington and Abraham Lincoln is the way I would put him. But he was a great president. But if you'll study and check on him, you will find he didn't split very many logs. The guy was lazy. He really was. He was lazy. They couldn't get him to work. And so they'd send him out to split logs, and you know what he would do? He'd take a book with him. And he would go out there and he'd split a log, and then he'd sit down and he'd read a book. And he was reading during the day. He was reading at night in front of the fireplace. He was gleaning an education. He was getting an education, and he went through this, lost several elections, but he was in politics, and when he walked in that White House, he was not the old fool that we all think that he really was. That he was a country boy, yeah. He had the ability to take these little proverbs like we're studying and say these things, and he was a great man, but don't ever get the idea that he was just an ignorant man that was put in there and then tried to take over without really knowing what he was doing. In 11, the discretion of a man maketh him slow to anger, and it is his glory to pass over a transgression. So how many times we talked about this? That a person is, if he's really got discretion, he'll be slow to anger, and then when somebody sins against him, it's his glory to pass over it. He's not going to hold their nose to the grindstone. Yeah, but you said this. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't aim to. Yeah, but you said this. Well, I'm sorry, but you said this. And I'm not forgiving you, not until you do what I want you to do. There's no glory in that. It says the glory is just exactly the opposite. In 13, a foolish man is the calamity of his father, and the contentions of a wife are continual dropping. So there, we've studied about children, how much sorrow that they can bring, but now then we find how much sorrow that a wife can bring. And a contentious wife, said her, is like a continual dropping. And later on we'll see again, it's just like water dropping, dip, 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 dip. It just wear on your nerves and drive you crazy. Now, the idea is that a wife can absolutely drive a husband out of his mind. So you say, well, it'd be better then not to get a wife, because those things are really dangerous things to have, those wives. Well, in the next sentence, it says, houses and riches are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from Jehovah. Now it goes to the other end, that we can inherit worldly things from our forefathers, but a prudent wife, a wise wife, is a gift from God. And what that's talking about is, you remember back at the very beginning, when God said it's not good for man to be alone, and so I will make a help or an answer for him. And he made a woman, and she was the answer to man's problems. That's what this is talking about. Now, a woman can be the answer to a man's problems. Nothing greater in the life of a man than having a prudent wife there. Well, I suppose we could talk how many hundreds of hours on this. The power of a woman is the way I would look at it. And you'd say, well, the power of a woman, she has the power to absolutely destroy a man, or she has the power to absolutely make the man. We've got old sayings that you find a great woman or great man, you'll find a great woman standing beside him. But here we find that the power of a woman is indescribable. You don't find this really in a man, described in a man in the Scriptures. But the power of a woman is so powerful that she can be the most destructive thing in the world, or she can be the greatest gift in the world. And that is the power that a woman has at her discretion. So ladies, remember that. And take hold and understand that you have that ability, and decide which one you're going to be. Well, let's get back to slothfulness. Slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and the idle soul shall suffer hunger. So here now we come back to slothfulness, and so that just casts you into a deep sleep. It takes away all of your energy, all of your enthusiasm, when you're slothful. I'm going to skip some verses. 17, he that hath pity upon the poor lendeth unto Jehovah, and his good deeds will he pay him again. So God wants us to help the poor. And it says, he that lendeth to the poor, it's the same as lending to Jehovah. The reason for that is it's Jehovah's plan to take care of the poor. And the way God intends to take care of the poor is for the rich to lend to them, the rich to help the poor. Now again, great big subject. We find what Paul said, if a man will not work, neither let him eat. If a man is sluggish, lazy, won't work, let him starve to death. But if a person is actually poor, they need help, then when we do help them, that's the same as lending unto Jehovah. 18, chasten thy son, seeing there is hope, and set not thy heart upon his destruction. We'll run across this again. And that is, chasten your son, discipline your son, because there's always hope. When you have a rebellious son, if you don't discipline him, there is no hope. But if you do discipline him, then there is hope. Excuse me. 19. A man of great wrath shall bear the penalty, for if thou deliver him, thou shalt do it again. So here again we come to this anger and wrath, that it is an honorable thing for a man not to get quickly angered, not to become wrathful. And he said in here very quickly that a man of great wrath shall bear the penalty. He's going to get in trouble, and he's going to want you to bail him out. A man of great wrath generally ends up in the jail. You get a phone call in the middle of the night, could you come down and help me? Well, he goes ahead and he says, for if thou deliverest him, thou shalt do it all over again. Now, he might not be in jail, but he may be in some other kind of a problem. But if a man is a wrathful, angry individual, and that he acts on his anger, and it gets him in trouble, whatever the trouble is, he's going to want you to come and bail him out. And if you do it, you're just going to have to do it over again. And you'll have to do it over again, because that's what's going to happen to a wrathful individual. 20. Hear counsel and receive instruction, that thou mayest be wise in thy latter end. So listen to advice, listen to counsel, and in their latter end, you will become wise. Let me come down here to 23. We've seen this. The fear of Jehovah tendeth to life. Remember, the fear of Jehovah is the beginning of wisdom, and that's going to always tend to cause you to have a good life, and he that hath it shall abide satisfied. 24, the sluggard again, a very picturesque way. The sluggard beareth his hand in the dish, and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. You can tell that Solomon was disgusted when he wrote this. Here, a sluggard, and won't work, and you have to care for him. And finally he says a sluggard is like a guy that puts his spoon in his dish, and he just sits there. And he's so lazy he won't lift the spoon to his mouth. And you have to come lift the spoon and put it in his mouth. He is really disgusted at that. In verse 26, verse 27, cease, my son, to hear instruction, only to err from the words of knowledge. Now this is where he said, if you cease or stop hearing instruction, the minute that you stop taking counsel, the minute you stop getting advice, the minute you know everything there is to know, at least you think you do, and so you stop getting instruction, then all of a sudden, he says, that's only going to cause you to err from the words of knowledge. So then you're going to start making mistakes. A worthless wisdom mocketh at justice, and so forth. And 29, judgments are prepared for scoffers, and stripes for the back of fools. So he's just giving us these little tidbits of information that happens to us every day in our life. Okay, class dismissed.